Welcome back, everybody, to another nerd session. We're going to be studying the Song of Solomon today with your host, Smooth Dr. E-Dub. Sadly, I don't really have the radio voice to pull anything off like that, but this is your normal professor, Dr. Wickman here. We're going to be talking about the Song of Solomon today, which is a series of love poems. And we're going to see if we can make sense of what their purpose is. So here we have our key concepts for the Song of Solomon, only two today. We just want to see if we can have a better understanding of wisdom literature, and then we'll get into the purpose of the Song of Solomon for today. So for the last 4 nerd sessions or so, we've been studying wisdom literature. I think it'd be helpful for us to have to recap what the value of this has all been. Why are these wisdom books in the Bible? They're there because the Israelites valued wisdom, as we've discussed all semester long. Just as much as Americans want to become rich, the Israelites wanted to become wise, and so they needed books that would help them get there. The classic book to help you get there would have been the book of Proverbs, but Job, to a certain extent, Psalms, Ecclesiastes, these were books that also would have been valuable to the Israelites in helping them become wise people. And you needed this variety of books because wisdom, to be a wise person, was never a simple thing in terms of just follow a simple roadmap. Instead, wisdom required a certain amount of discernment. And so you are not going to have simple, straightforward answers in wisdom literature oftentimes. You're going to have a certain messiness, a certain amount of dialogue and tension between the different books of wisdom literature. So overall, the Israelites are using these wisdom books to help them become wise people. So how does the Song of Solomon then fit in with these other books in helping us to become wise people? So let's talk about what the Song of Solomon is. And to be brutally honest about what it is, it's a series of erotic love poems between a man and a woman. You alternate back and forth between a man singing about the woman in his life and a woman singing back to the man in her life. The material in it, if you're willing to read between the lines, or frankly, you don't even have to read between the lines with some of the passages, is the kind of stuff that would make you blush, especially if you were reading it out loud around your parents, I dare say. Because to put it bluntly, a lot of what is being discussed here is sex and sexuality. And so the man and the woman are not only talking about how attractive they find the other one to be. There seem to be instances where they are talking about the joys of their sexual encounters with one another. Now, it's worth saying here that the two people in this song, although they are not married, they are definitely not having a simple Tinder hookup. This is not just about the two of them swiping right on each other and enjoying a fun one-night stand and then just moving on with the rest of their lives. Instead, they are expressing not only intense physical desires for one another, they do express some intense emotional and spiritual desires for one another. A good example of this comes from chapter 4, start with verse 7. The man has just talked about how hot his wife is, or how hot his lover is, and if you read through the description, starting in verse 4, it is a little bit amusing how they felt were um, what they thought were ways of expressing how attractive another person was, especially in comparison to the way we do things today. For instance, the guy says about the woman in chapter 4, verse 1, "Your hair is like a flock of goats moving down from the slopes of Gilead." I can say with a great deal of confidence that if I tried to give my wife this compliment that her hair is like a flock of goats, I don't think that she would take too kindly to that. That's not the kind of thing I should be writing on a Valentine to her. If you're intrigued by this, you should be reading the whole thing. But chapter 4 is one of the rather more intriguing descriptions of a woman. But after we describe how hot the woman is from the perspective of the man, then he wraps it up by saying, "You are fair, my love. There is no flaw in you. Come with me from Lebanon, my bride. Come with me from Lebanon. Depart from the peak of Amana, from the peak of Senir and Hermon, from the den of lions, from the mountain of leopards. You have ravished my heart, my sister, my bride. You have ravished my heart with a glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. How sweet is your love, my sister, my bride." Okay, two things here. First, just because he's calling her his sister, that is that is not to be taken literally. That is meant to imply the closeness of their relationship. Now, when he says these things to her, he is trying to say to her, "Hey, I miss you. Please be with me all the time. I can't stand to be without you." And he's expressing a kind of love for her that we sometimes express, especially in the early days of a relationship. Um, he is describing her with all these kinds of sweet nothings, and they sound kind of silly to us, like describing her neck like the like a thousand buckle. Excuse me. Her neck is like the Tower of David, built for an arsenal, whereon hang 1,000 bucklers, all of them shields of warriors. Again, not another thing I'm going to write on my Valentine's Day card to my wife anytime soon. But as kind of ridiculous as that sounds to us, we say ridiculous things about the people we fall in love with all the time. Usually in class, I ask people to tell me, okay, what kinds of silly pet names have you given to your boyfriends or girlfriends, and all kinds of silly names come up like Cupcake and Darling and Sweetheart and Muffin and Honey Buns and things like that. And so all that leads to me basically saying that, he's comparing in the Song of Solomon, the man is comparing her to farm animals and giant towers, which sounds silly, but we compare our significant others to sugary baked goods and simple carbohydrates, which is really just as silly as they are. And so the point is, this guy has fallen so madly in love with this woman that he's making a fool of himself, just as we sometimes make fools of ourselves, all in the name of love. And so the love that is being expressed between these two, is it sexual? Yes, absolutely. But is it emotional? Absolutely. That's there as well. There is an intense bond between these two that spans any form of love, any kind of love that you can possibly think of. So with that said, now that we have some idea of what's going on in here, we need to talk about what the purpose of this book is in the Bible. It's especially confusing when we notice that this is the second of the two books in the Old Testament that does not explicitly mention God. So over the years, one common solution to not having God in this particular book was to kind of force God into the book by interpreting the Song of Solomon allegorically or metaphorically. And so the song becomes a metaphor or an allegory for the relationship between God and Israel, or from a Christian point of view, for the relationship between Jesus and his church. And that works to an extent until we think back about some of the things that are being expressed between the man and the woman. And we have to ask, how comfortable are we with understanding God, God's love towards Israel, or Jesus's love towards the church in those particular ways? Um, and at that point, we have to say, I'm not sure this is the best way of understanding this. So maybe we don't need to force God into this particular book by making this a metaphor here. Instead, maybe we can take this a little bit more literally and think back on wisdom literature for a minute. Wisdom literature is trying to teach us how to live a good life. Proverbs tells us good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. Therefore, we should be good people, we should pursue wisdom, and we should expect a reward. But we also know in the back of our minds that's not always going to be the way it is, because of the book of Job. And we also know that from the book of Ecclesiastes that we should be careful about placing too much value in our work or in ordinary things, because they're ultimately going to let us down. We're not going to find value in them. And so, what is the Song of Solomon's contribution then to teaching us how to live a good and wise life? Well, what's the book all about? Love, in every sense of the word. And so the book seems to be giving us an answer to how to live the good life. Pause for a second, see if you can puzzle out what I'm trying to get at here. The book suggests to us that Christians should not be afraid of the topic of sex and sexuality. We should be willing to embrace it. We should be willing to understand that it is something from God. It is something that is celebrated in the book that is given to us by God. But beyond the issues of sex, the book ultimately is about two people who are so stupid in love with one another, they just can't stand to be apart. And so what I would suggest here is that the contribution of the Song of Solomon to the Bible, to wisdom literature, and to our understanding of how to live a good life is that it encourages us to go out and find that one person who we too can go fall madly, stupidly in love with. So much so that we're willing to make up silly names for the other person, like sweetheart and darling, and that we're willing to sound kind of silly and foolish around them because we just can't stand to be apart from them and enjoy all of the wonderful aspects that come with being in love with someone. So ultimately, what I would say is, and this is the test answer, this is the answer to the test question is, what's the point of the Song of Solomon? It's a positive portrayal of sexuality within the context of fidelity, which means faithfulness to one another. They're not hooking up with one another, and the book is encouraging us to go out and see the value of loving one special person throughout your life. I think that's actually kind of a nice note to end this semester on. So this is the last time that I will be chatting at you, unless we have a Zoom session after you've listened to this. So I've enjoyed being your teacher. I'm sorry that the semester has gone the way that it has, but I hope that you have gotten something out of these online sessions, even if it's not the way that we had all expected the semester to go. If there's something that I can do for you, please let me know. Please send me an email as you prepare for the test, and I will be there to help you prepare for the final test. Good luck on your final exam for this class, as well as finishing up the semester for your other classes.